July 1863, the hills of southern Pennsylvania echoed with cannon fire. The fate of a nation hung in the balance as 165,000 Americans brother against brother clashed in what would become the largest battle ever fought on U.S. soil. This was not just another conflict in a long and bloody war. This was Robert E. Lee's bold gamble. This was Gettysburg. Just 2 months earlier, General Robert E. Lee had achieved what many called a masterpiece at Chancellorsville. Outnumbered nearly 2-1, he split his forces and routed the Union Army, but the cost was devastating. Over 13,000 Confederate casualties, and the death of his most trusted Lieutenant Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Though victorious, Lee understood the truth. The Confederacy could not survive a war of attrition. Its manpower was limited, its supply lines stretched thin, and the Union blockade was strangling the Southern economy. In the West, Confederate forces were crumbling under pressure. Vicksburg was on the verge of falling. To Lee, there was only one option left: take the war to the north. Strike into Pennsylvania, relieve pressure on the Western Front, and perhaps, just perhaps, force the Union to sue for peace. On June 3, 1863, Lee's Army of Northern Virginia began moving north. Over 70,000 men crossed into Maryland and then Pennsylvania, spreading fear through the Union heartland. Lee's goal was clear: destroy a Union army on Northern soil and gain international recognition, or at the very least, shatter Northern morale. Opposing him was the newly appointed commander of the Union Army of the Potomac, George Gordon Meade, a capable and cautious leader. Meade had barely taken command when Lee's army was already deep in Union territory. Meade moved quickly, shadowing Lee's movements and preparing to strike. On July 1st, Confederate forces under General A.P. Hill encountered Union cavalry west of the small town of Gettysburg. What began as a skirmish rapidly escalated as reinforcements poured in on both sides. By mid-afternoon, Union forces under General John Reynolds had arrived, but Reynolds was soon killed in action. The Confederates, under Generals Ewell and Hill, pushed the Union back through the town and onto high ground south of Gettysburg Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. Despite the opportunity, Lee held back. He ordered General Ewell to take the heights, if practicable. Ewell hesitated and the Union dug in. That night, more Union troops poured in. The high ground was theirs, and Meade was on his way. On July 2nd, Lee launched a coordinated attack against both Union flanks. To the south, Confederate General Longstreet led an assault on Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the Wheatfield. Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and his 20th Maine made a desperate stand on Little Round Top, repelling multiple charges and eventually counterattacking with bayonets when their ammunition ran out. To the north, Ewell assaulted Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. The fighting was intense, but Union lines held. Lee believed he was close to breaking through. He would try again. July 3rd, Lee devised a bold plan: strike the Union center, which he believed was weakened. After a massive artillery barrage, 12,500 Confederate soldiers marched across open fields toward the center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. Leading the charge, General George Pickett and his division. The assault, now known as Pickett's Charge, was a disaster. Union artillery tore through the lines. Musket fire decimated the ranks. Few Confederates reached the stone wall at the Union center, and fewer still made it back. In under an hour, the Confederates suffered over 6,000 casualties. Lee, realizing the assault had failed, rode out to meet his survivors, saying, "It's all my fault." On July 4th, as Lee's battered army began retreating south, the siege of Vicksburg ended another crushing Union victory. Gettysburg marked the high-water mark of the Confederacy. Never again would Lee invade the North. From this point on, the Confederacy was on the defensive. Lee had lost nearly a third of his army. Meade, though victorious, chose not to pursue aggressively, earning criticism from President Lincoln. But the cost of the battle had shaken the South to its core. Gettysburg was more than just a military turning point, it was a psychological one. The Union had proven it could repel the Confederacy on its own soil. European nations, particularly Britain and France, who had considered recognizing the South, backed away. 4 months later, President Lincoln stood on that same battlefield and delivered the Gettysburg Address. In just 272 words, he reframed the war not as a struggle merely for union, but for freedom, equality, and a new birth of liberty. Why did Lee risk so much at Gettysburg? Some say pride. Others, desperation. Perhaps he saw a narrow window to end the war quickly, and couldn't afford to wait. Regardless, Gettysburg revealed the true cost of civil war. Nearly 50,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in just 3 days. Thousands of families changed forever. It remains a reminder of what happens when a nation turns on itself and how even great generals can falter. Gettysburg was Lee's boldest gamble and his greatest defeat. From its blood-soaked fields would rise a stronger Union and a clearer vision of what America could become. If history is the story of choices, then Gettysburg was one of the most consequential ever made.